Good afternoon. My name is David Lose. I have the privilege of preaching here with great colleagues and students and staff members, and also the great privilege of working with our team in the Center for Lifelong Learning, and it's in that capacity that I get to serve as host for this gathering, and am pleased and delighted to welcome you to what I think will be a powerful and stimulating couple of days. We are, again, very glad that you're here as we explore the future and the present of this church we love so much by paths untrodden, faith, and leadership in a time of change. I want to offer a special welcome to folks who are at their first convocation, or perhaps at Luther Seminary for the very first time. Please know that you are especially welcome, and if you're new to the campus and need help with anything, the folks staffing the registration desk are immensely helpful. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest, and I look forward so much, as I know you do, to hearing her. Diana Butler Bass is one of those rare persons who has managed to carve out a successful and influential career as an independent thinker and researcher. What does that mean, you may wonder? Well, it means that she writes and she reads and she carries out extensive research. She engages people from all walks of life in conversation and then combines all of that into incisive and important works that regularly poke at our assumptions, shape our self-understanding, and at their best, point us forward to imagine a church we might not have imagined otherwise. Having earned a PhD from Duke University, Diana has taught at Westmont College, the University of California at Santa Barbara, Macalester College, Rhodes College, and the Virginia Theological Seminary. At these institutions, she's taught church history, American religious history, history of Christian thought, religion and politics, and congregational studies. And among all those activities, she still has had time to write 7, or is this now 8? 8 books, including the very influential A People's History of Christianity and Christianity for the Rest of Us, and hot off the press, and I mean I can feel the warmth, because this is an embargoed copy, not yet available for pre-order on Amazon and available at bookstores all over the place in 2 weeks, is Christianity After Religion, the End of Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. In addition to all of that, Diana has served as a resource to or written for various publications and media outlets, including USA Today, Time, Newsweek, The Washington Post, CNN, Fox, PBS, NPR, The New York Times, Sojourners, The Christian Century, Clergy Journal, and others. In her spare time... What spare time? You don't have to answer. Let's just say that in her spare time, Diana is gracious enough to join folks like us, who are both eager and a little anxious for a glimpse into the future, but also hungry for a word of realistic hope. For this reason, Diana, we are so grateful for your presence with us. Please join me in welcoming her to Luther Seminary.
It's wonderful to be with you today and tomorrow. Today, it's my distinct pleasure and really an honor to talk about the book that I have coming out in just 2 weeks. I'm going to share with you from this. This is the main title, Christianity After Religion. The subtitle of the book as it comes out is a little different than this. It's a little bit more sort of flashy and promo-y, The End of Church. You'll see why both of the subtitles work as I go along. So this is what I'm going to talk about for the next 2 days. I'm going to talk about hope, and I'm going to talk about fear. Since I'm with Lutherans, I'm going to talk about fear first. And I know this from that Germanic, Nordic, sort of Northern European thing, is that you always go to the darkest places first. And that's good, because it's out of those kinds of places that we can develop realistic hope, which is my dream for all of us. In order to do this, I'm just going to talk mostly today about the challenges and the worries and the fears, and tomorrow will be mostly about the hopes and the potentials. We're going to begin with that trough in the waves, the low place. If you're in one of those places where there's a rip current, where you're in that low spot in the waves and things are not going your way, the last thing you want to do is flail around or try to swim against the current. You have to hang on out there and swim with it until it releases you. And so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to hang out and we're going to notice things. And the way we're going to notice things is, first of all, we're going to talk about the weather. Unless there's really dramatic weather somewhere else in the world, we don't really think about what's happening 50 miles or 100 miles or 500 miles from our house. Instead, we're just mostly worried about what we see in our immediate vicinity. And weather may be threatening, as it is in this particular picture, or it may be fair. One of the things we've all learned, no matter what our opinion or our perspective on global warming is that weather is not the climate. Climate encompasses the statistics of temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, wind, rainfall, atmospheric particle count, and other meteorological elemental measures in a given region over long periods. Climate can be contrasted to weather, which is the present condition of these elements and their variations over shorter periods. Most congregational leaders look out the window and they try to extrapolate religious trends from the weather that they can see from their own perspective. The weather in your congregation might be threatening or it might be fair. But what it's not is it's not this. It's not the climate. When I wrote Christianity for the Rest of Us, the book that was funded so wonderfully by the Lilly Endowment, as we all call them, the church's one foundation, they asked me essentially to go out and do a weather report of what was going on in some mainline congregations that were having clear skies. And so that was my job. I went out and I gathered up stories from 50 congregations across the main line, 6 different denominations, all different parts of the United States, congregations that were finding new life, new sense of mission in the world, new optimism, new hope, new power to witness to the life of Christ in community. They were amazing. They changed my life. The weather is really good in many churches across the country, even some very unexpected ones. But the question becomes, what's the climate of faith? There's either a storm coming or a storm that is just departing. And this is what we've seen in the first 12 years of the new millennium. We have seen eroding levels of belief in God, and tied to that, eroding levels of certainty as to whether or not God exists. We have seen eroding levels of attendance at religious services all across the board. Mainline churches, evangelical churches, Roman Catholic churches. Indeed, Martin Marty wrote a little piece, I think it was in Sightings in 2009, where he was reflecting on the most recent yearbook of American and Canadian churches, the statistics they report to the National Council of Churches. And in that, of all of the Christian denominations in Canada and North America, only 4 reported any statistical numerical growth in the year previous. And they were the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and 2 Pentecostal denominations. And, you know, I had been seeing that, and I had been paying attention to those trends, but I didn't want to believe them. But as soon as Martin Marty says it's true, it is. It is really bad out there. Attendance at religious services is also down significantly. You might hear a statistic that 44% of Americans reported that they went to church or another religious service in the previous 7 days in the year 2010, which is the year we have for the most recent reporting of this statistic. That statistic is what we call a self-reported statistic. I was just in Atlanta at Columbia Seminary with all those nice Presbyterians, Southern Presbyterians down there, and as soon as I said that, they knew exactly what that meant, because in the South, what self-reported statistic means is that your mother is on the extension. This past year, we have had what I think is the most amazing sort of bells and whistle survey that people will be wrestling with for years to come, that came out of the University of Michigan on church attendance in the United States. It came out of their School of Public Opinion Research. It comes from a researcher named Philip Brenner. I have no idea if he's a Christian or not. He just got interested in this question. And he did a comparative study of church attendance in 12 nations, 10 European countries, and 2 countries here in North America, us, and Canada. One of the things that Americans love to say is that we are exceptional because our levels of church attendance are so high. You hear that in the news often. You will hear it sometimes from TV preachers. American religion is different because Americans go to church more than anybody else in the developed world. Well, the people at the University of Michigan found out that that's not true, that Americans have the same level of church attendance as 2 countries in Europe. Those countries are Slovenia and Italy. The thing that makes Americans exceptional when it comes to church attendance is a contrast with our European friends, and that is Europeans actually tell survey takers the truth. But what the statistics of the last decade and really the 3 or 4 decades before that reveal to us is this, is that religion is in a bear market. And what I mean by religion here is I mean conventional ways of understanding religious adherence, religious identity, religious belief, and religious practice. Now, at this point, some of you are feeling a little depressed, but I also think that this should be news. This should be good news. Bear with me just for a second. Why is this good news? It's not you. You as a parent or a grandparent did not fail your children or grandchildren if they don't believe in God. You as a church leader have not failed your community if your attendance is down. And you as a Lutheran have not failed to communicate the beauty of your tradition and the power of Lutheran theology if there are fewer Lutherans. It is the same for everybody, because what we're talking about here is global religious climate change. The climate around that weather report, that good weather report, in that one place or 2 places or 3 places that may be represented here, well, that's existing within this bigger picture of this, a bear market in conventional religious faith. One of the biggest things that I think is going on in mainline congregations is that people are taking on way too much responsibility for things they haven't caused. And one of my real dreams about this material is that we can finally free the mainline from the grief that it has been suffering over this. Because the grief has inhibited us from doing our best work and freeing us to the best kinds of creativity that we can have. Let's just let it go and realize it's about global climate change not something we caused in our own backyard. But what did cause it? Why are we where we are? Well, let me say that, first of all, a lot of this is the result of 4 decades of change. Maybe 5 decades, maybe even 7 decades, if you pay attention to what historians and philosophers are saying. We had 70 years of philosophical change that set this up when we came into the new millennium, but the last 12 years have been among the roughest 12 years, probably in the last 500 of Christian history. Look at this. These are the 4 shocks of the early part of the 21st century. Why are people irked at religion right now? Well, I think this is why they're irked. We came into the new millennium all enthusiastic about religion, spirituality, angels, that Jesus is returning, whatever was happening. Everybody was in a millennial fever about the 2,000-year anniversary of Christianity. And what did we get? On September 11th, 2001, we got terrorists who smashed planes into buildings in New York, Washington, and crashed one in Pennsylvania. And that act of terrorism was linked to religion. They did it because they believed that their God wanted them to. And they prayed, and they washed, and they went on a mission to change the world. And they did. And all of this stuff about September 11th got associated with religious fanaticism, religious fundamentalism, religion as a whole. It wasn't just Muslims, that was bad enough, but it was any person with deep religious commitment might at any time pick up a sword and commit an act of violence against one's neighbor. Well, we had not recovered from that when 6 months later, in the spring of 2002, the Boston Globe reported in a series of stories about 5 Roman Catholic priests who had abused children in their care. And that story, from that one newspaper in one tiny little corner of the world, became probably the biggest crisis that faced the Roman Catholic Church in the last 700 years. The Reformation was a blip on the screen compared to what the Catholics are facing right now. So, 2001, religion associated with violence. 2002, religion associated with abuse, especially sexual abuse and abuse of power. 2003, this is our time to shine. I'm Episcopalian. We did it. We elected the first out gay bishop to be a leader of a global Protestant religious community, Gene Robinson of New Hampshire. Gene is a great friend of mine. Gene is not an issue. He's an amazing Christian person. He's a great preacher. Lots of wonderful things he's done in the Diocese of New Hampshire. So I am not the person who would stand here and say that it was what we did in electing an out gay partnered man to be a religious leader, but I am the person who can say how we did it was, let's just say this in a very Episcopal way, inelegant. There we were, across the front pages of every newspaper in the land, as mean-spirited schismatics who were stealing church property and calling one another names. Whatever you think of issues, this is not a way for Christians to behave, especially in public. If indeed you are one of the most well-liked religious groups and you have a public conflict about faith where your church winds up on the front page of the New York Times, you have lost your best card. And then finally, this one, I don't quite know what to call it, but I finally settled on this term, evangelical Constantinianism. We had an election in 2004 when the George W. Bush, who actually was, at the time, the president with the lowest popularity numbers to be re-elected as president. Our evangelical friends, who are political conservatives, garnered enough power to actually elect Bush. They created the biggest voting bloc in history, and the largest percentage of that biggest voting bloc voted for President Bush, and that's how he won. The point is that in that election, religion, Christianity in particular, became associated with political partisanship and a single political agenda. That has been difficult for everybody in the United States who is a Christian, but it was really difficult for evangelicals. They achieved what they had dreamed of achieving since 1980 in founding the moral majority. They won the presidency, but they lost their children. Young evangelical adults do not agree with their parents and grandparents on political and social issues. There is only one political issue on which young evangelicals agree with their parents. That's abortion. You look at that list. My PhD is actually in church history. If I was studying this period of time, 50 or 70 or 100 or 200 years from now, and I looked at these 4 years in what happened in religious history in the United States, I would say to myself, how did these people even survive this? It was into this environment, the four shocks, that came the crisis. And the crisis, of course, is the financial crisis of 2008. It has been awful. And every person in here knows how awful it has been. Now, one of the things that is true about this recession, this little depression, is that people have not turned to the church in this time of need, except for actual stuff. Well, this is very similar to what happened during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Any of you that were around then? This is exactly what happened, is that the middle class disappeared from churches, that the churches suffered a Great Depression, as well as the society. And the only religious groups that grew during the 1930s were religious groups that were on the margins of culture, that were highly experiential, and that offered new powerful visions of meaning, purpose, and life. When we come to endings, we should grieve, and we should say goodbye. But we should also wonder what's right around the corner. That's what I'll be talking about tomorrow. Today, I simply leave you with adios. So we say goodbye to what has been. We sit in the grief of Holy Saturday, and we simply wonder what will come. Adios for now.
Diana, thank you. You have been charged, I would say called, with bringing a hard word, but do so with equal measures of grace and humor and a sensitive candor, which we appreciate. At the same time, we are so looking forward to tomorrow. I worshiped at a congregation once. It was their practice to sing just the first verse of any hymn to allow time for all the other things they wanted to do to keep the worship disciplined. Works for a number of hymns, but when we sang A Mighty Fortress, that old satanic foe who seeks to work us woe, on earth he has no equal. So, we're looking forward to more stanzas tomorrow. Thank you.